Okay, so we can probably start now. Those three attendees, please feel free to ask anything in the chat box, or we've also got a Q&A box as well. But I just wanted to introduce everyone to today's Knowledge Festival topic. And today we'll be talking about changing the narrative within the conservation space with regards to diversity and inclusion, but more barriers to entry or entry routes and career paths into the sector. And I'm joined by some very esteemed panelists. So I'm going to ask them all in turn to introduce themselves. So I'll ask James to introduce himself first. Then we've got Anand and then Svetlana, if you don't mind. And I'll do that in a moment after I've introduced myself. I forgot to introduce myself. I'm called Grace Mansah-Owusu. I'm an organisational psychologist at Oxford HR, and I work within our leadership and change team, which includes coaching, team development, workshops, as well as diversity inclusion consulting within the non-for-profit and for-purpose sector. So I'm now going to pass over to my colleague, James.
Thanks, Grace. I'm James Sawyer. I'm a principal consultant at Oxford HR, working in the sustainability environment conservation space for us on the practice side. I also have a career that has spanned both conservation and environmental NGOs over 30 years.
Thank you. Thanks, James, so much. Anand?
Hello there from London, and yeah, my name is Anand Punja. I work in a home office, and I'm currently the Chief Engagement and Partnerships Officer at FSC International. I've been involved in the kind of responsible business and conservation space, let's say, in those two kind of worlds in particular, over the last 25 years or so in one form or another. So nice to be here.
Thank you, Anand. And last but not least, we have Svetlana.
Hi, everyone. I'm Svetlana Ignatieva. I'm the Chief Operating Officer at Fauna Flora. For those who don't know us, Fauna Flora is an international wildlife conservation charity. We work closely with conservation partners in well over 40 countries to support saving nature together. And we focus on particular biodiversity, protecting and restoring habitats, saving species from extinction, developing sustainable livelihoods for people who live closest to nature. So I'm delighted to be here and talk about our EDI initiatives.
Thank you, Svetlana. Fantastic to have you, and Anand as well, and James, obviously. So I'd like to start the session. James, would you like to give an overview of the conservation sector in terms of what does it include in terms of roles, and in terms of diversity and inclusion, what have you seen over the years? Because you've got quite a long history, as is everybody else on the panel.
Yeah, I mean, the conservation sector, like a lot of non-profit sectors, has a kind of wide diversity of roles in it. Everything from policy to finance managers and beyond. And I think certainly I've seen over the years, when I think about disadvantaged or lower represented groups, different kind of penetration into those roles. So we certainly see more diversity in roles such as finance roles, as an example, much less so in policy. I guess some people might kind of say, well, hey, look, why is there a white guy on the panel when we're talking about EDI? But I think, there's a really key element, which I think is born out of the Oxford HR report that we've just launched, around how we have some sort of existing and somewhat perennial barriers to entry, which cut across a range of EDI issues. And certainly, as we already know, there are lots of underrepresented groups that cut across the issue of kind of socioeconomic backgrounds, and lower economic kind of family histories, etc. And I think there's something that I've personally experienced coming from a pretty poor background myself. It was a real struggle to get into the conservation space. There were lots of barriers to entry around unpaid internships, as an example, and issues to do with how I spoke. It is a sector that has traditionally been very white, very middle class, and economically, it's quite a struggle to get into. There is certainly a feeling, whether you start in the field workspace or whether you start in an office-based environment, that you kind of have to work for free for a significant period of time before you're going to get a paid job. I started out in the field working on conservation projects overseas, and I would say I didn't get my first paid job in conservation until I was 28. So that was 6 years. And that was a mixture of having to come home and work for 2 years, to go out and take a contract and pay my flight and all sorts of other things, to go and do a year's work somewhere overseas, and then come back and repeat that process until I built up enough experience to be able to access a paid job. And I think about that from a perspective of, coming from a background where my parents, and I didn't have a rich partner and stuff to support me, that took me some time. However, if I'd have come from an even poorer background, it would have just been impossible. Like the sums of money, I was lucky I lived in the southeast, so I could find other labouring jobs and various other things to fund that. But it remains a significant barrier in the sector, the fact that individuals are expected to work for free. And we see the same in the office environment with unpaid internships in administrative roles and others as well. So I think there's a lot that we can do to change that up. But certainly my perspective is that, if you don't have money and you don't come from a rich background, it's significantly harder to forge a career in conservation.
Thank you for sharing your experience, James. Really, really interesting to hear that. Anand, can you just give us like an overview, a whistle-stop tour about some of your experiences in the sector, possibly how you came into the sector and what you've seen over the years as well?
I mean, I really relate to what James said, first of all. So I was born here in the UK, so kind of, British Indian. So kind of, so very much felt that. But coming from a diaspora family, an Indian family that came over from Uganda, it's definitely been tough, because it's also, how do you manage the expectation, in my case, managing the expectations of parents as well, in terms of like very much pushed into a certain so you're not just trying to find your feet into this world of conservation or responsible business, sustainability more broadly, etc. But you're then also having to kind of fight your family a little bit to say that this is where I want to go. This is where I want my identity, my career to be in. And they're kind of pushing you down another track in particular, saying no, there's not going to be, there's no career in that. You just you want to go down these kind of routes, so you're very much pushed down those routes. So and it's really puts pressure on those family relationships as well, in particular. So that's something that came across as you were talking, James, but also when reading the report as well. And then the second thing is that for me, I think my experience has been around, and I think it still exists in some of the school systems that we have here in the UK, in particular, is that if you're in the top, the gifted and talented, you kind of get pathways. And then if you're in the kind of the lower end of the kind of like the ones that are struggling, tick the right boxes from a profile perspective, all that kind of stuff as well, socioeconomic brand, and you get, again, more support. People in the middle of the road, which I was in the middle of the road kind of I guess on that pathway, both academically, and it improved as I went through the academia world, but also through my career as well. So yeah, who do you have to champion you? Who do you have to support you in those? And that's something that I found really, really difficult to access. Mentoring, championing, from external, but also within internally. So and actually, I think one of the things that came as I was reading the report earlier on today, just preparing myself, one of the things, I think I was the first non-white leader in FSC, actually, in the kind of leadership panel. And in about when I came in 2016, there was a new leadership group created that kind of more globally around 2017, 18, and I hadn't really actually registered that until then. Oh, who did I have to aspire to? Who did I have to champion me? And kind of like, as I've progressed my own career and at FSC and wanting to, I'm kind of looking how do I use my position, my where I've got to support others and inspire, support, champion others into roles like I've been able to kind of create and kind of aspire to myself. And it's been hard work, but it would have been nice to have kind of a few more kind of someone to look up to, a mentor and champion me into that. And I think overall, that also leads me to kind of like talent management within the conservation sector. I think it's very easy to go outside of your organization to kind of find talent and to tick the right profile boxes in particular. Whereas identifying that talent within your organizations and then kind of finding pathways to progression and talent management, but with staying in boundaries around fairness and equity, not trying to show favoritism. That's a really hard balance. And I think that's where I kind of that's kind of where I think I've got to in my kind of my career, trying to manage that and kind of understand where that balance is as well.
Thank you so much for sharing, Anand. I think your experience has been, like, the way you spoke was so fascinating and really illuminating, especially around um, the kind of people seeing this career path as a viable career option. And I think many people, regardless of culture, will see this as like, what do you want to be a conservationist? Like, what do you mean? What does that mean? So you're educating the people around you, you're educating yourself, so it's even more of a barrier. And then with immigrant families, I can relate, there's kind of more trust in established career paths because you know what you're going to get at the end of it. You do law, you're going to be a lawyer. You do teaching, you're going to be a teacher. So it's like, that's a solid career. I understand that. So you go and do that. All this other stuff that you're talking about, I can't relate, so I can't help you. What if something goes wrong? So yeah, I can very much see that with this career path. It can be a little bit precarious, or it sounds precarious to other people if they're not in it. Svetlana, please can you kind of give us some insight as to your experience at Flora and Fauna of kind of bridging some of these gaps and some of those programs that you've been doing there as well? Because I'm sure as a case study, it would be really fascinating to hear.
Sure, and I'll just everything James and Anand have said really resonates. My path, I suppose, is a bit different, but very much an immigrant, post-Soviet Union collapse, moving to America on my own and forging my own way. It wasn't easy. It's economically, excuse me, having to pay for university. So as an immigrant, again, you choose a career that will, that you can provide for yourself and your family back home. So I became an accountant, which is, again, solid. My parents understood that. But then I've always been passionate about nature. So I did have a career in the corporate world, working with Ernst & Young and then Cadbury and British Gas. So I have that corporate background, but the pull was always, my heart was always in the conservation space. So I made the decision to transition my career a bit kind of further along. And that is a viable path for a lot of people as well. Perhaps a start in a different career to give yourself that grounding, to give you great experience and transferable skills that then apply to the sector. So when I came to join Fauna and Flora as a chief operating officer, I was already quite experienced, I suppose, in quite a lot of areas that could add value to this organization. So, but on the EDI side, I suppose, again, being an immigrant, it all resonated, but I didn't necessarily personally have very much skills in terms of how we could change things in Fauna and Flora. What really helped us as an organization is asking our people, because we are such a diverse organization. So we went and worked within our own organization and formed a EDI group and learned from people around us. So it started as a kind of a grassroots initiative within the organization. And it has developed into a really solid program of work to the point that in 2023, we were able to actually employ a dedicated well-being and EDI officer who's joined us and is really now leading a lot of the work that we've done. But some of the more practical things that I think maybe I can share for what really worked us and helped our people is, yeah, we've talked about internships. So finding, it's difficult, obviously, again, we're always working in constrained budgets, but finding the money to offer paid internships has been really a great opportunity for people to gain that foothold into the sector. So we've offered 4 paid internships in 21 and 7 in 22, 23, and we're kind of aiming to keep it possible. We've done quite a lot of review of how we advertise, where we advertise, how we build terms of reference for what do we actually need some of the qualifications to that extent, so that doesn't prevent people from applying. We offered people feedback post interviews to again help them develop in their careers, even if they haven't been successful. We participate in various external initiatives, and that's been really, really helpful because it is it shows a public commitment to what you're going to do. So some of the the race reports in the UK and the diverse sustainability initiatives have been a really wonderful place to share insights and experiences on what practically works for people. And we have been successful, I suppose. I'm proud to say that in our annual diversity surveys, our workforce is quite a lot more diverse than some of the statistics in the report. I think your report mentions about sort of 4 or 5% people who are racially or ethnically diverse in the sector. In Fauna and Flora, we have 16% ethnically and racially diverse staff here in the UK. We're proud of that.
Thank you so much, Svetlana. It sounds like you're doing some great work, and I will be referring to some of those things in a moment. But just quickly, based on, especially with the paid internships, the shift to paid internships and the shift to kind of advertising in more diverse spaces, have you personally and as organizations noticed a difference in the caliber of people or the type of people that are applying and working at Flora and Fauna, and how has that like impacted the rest of the organization?
I think we are a little bit still in early days to get some meaningful statistics on that. So again, it's kind of what we can glean from our own employment statistics. I hope so. The barrier, again, the more kind of broader societal barrier of more money coming into conservation so we can pay better wage, so the career in conservation becomes much more viable. For the conservation agenda item to move up the global agenda so that it becomes a much more important, viable, respected, esteemed career. I think some of those are broader issues that we can tackle as an organization, but we do need to tackle societally and politically as well.
That makes perfect sense, and I really like the fact that you said that. Yes, you can do all small organizational structural issues of changes within the organization, but societal stuff, external stuff also needs to follow suit for it to be all aligned. But fantastic. So the next kind of question I'm going to ask, and I think you touched on it, Svetlana, is about specific barriers to entry, and the report highlights this. One of the ones I think I wanted to shed light on is education requirements. So currently in the conservation space, what is it like? So like if, for example, someone's just come out of a degree, not even a degree, a school leaver, let's just say, they finished either a vocational qualification or an academic qualification, they want to get into conservation, what kinds of roles would they be able to do, if any? And then is there a preference for like degree? If so, what kinds of degrees, and does that alter the type of diversity and or inclusion that we're seeing in the sector?
For me, I would say that, of course, again, as James said, field positions, probably opportunities are possible within the countries. In the UK, a lot of people join as more kind of, if they're interested in conservation work, but they'll join as a program administrator, for example, which gives them an amazing opportunity. It's a hard job because they're sort of supporting and doing things that might not seem like conservation, but without people knowing how to build budgets and account for things, or how to kind of connect all the people who are involved in the various conservation activities and support their teams with those type of tasks. It really is a great grounding for future conservation work. But of course, it does come oftentimes, with low paid or kind of entry level salaries. So that is a barrier for people who, are relying, or, young families. So from that perspective, another thing what we're trying to do is to become much more competitive in the sector, and to benchmark against our peers so that we're not falling behind, so that our salaries are kind of keeping up to date. And what we also try to do is give opportunities internally for people to sort of move around, so people can always apply for jobs, or always advertise all of our jobs, so that people can then see opportunities, and maybe they'll move to a different team or a different country to progress their career. But sometimes they also move to other organizations, and we try not to see that as a bad thing, because we're all in this together. People, they'll move somewhere else, they'll gain great experience there. Sometimes they come back, and we celebrate that. I think that's fantastic, because again, we can all share knowledge within the sector and help each other.
Thank you, Svetlana, for that. And I really like that idea of, if people do leave, sometimes they do come back some years later, and then they impact the organization in a different way. And sometimes, even if they don't come back, they usually have, like, a part of them will stay with the organization they've just left. They'll leave some kind of footprint. So that's always something positive. So thank you for sharing that. James, how about you? In terms of like education, what would you say about that in the sector?
I guess I would sort of describe this as one of the minor battles of my senior management career is trying to get degree qualifications off of job descriptions that don't require a degree. It's been a consistent, and continues to be a consistent thing when I look at job descriptions for even very low tier administrators to require a degree qualification. I think that's really problematic, because firstly, you don't. But in some ways, we don't value experience over qualifications enough. I think, and it's maybe a very UK centric quote, but with UK education, higher education becoming more and more expensive, we face an influence of this potentially getting worse if we don't address this issue of, does somebody actually need to have particular education requirements? I worked on this at a previous organisation in terms of not just removing those qualifications, but also looking at how we could provide the requisite experience. A bit like Svetlana mentioned, we put in place some living wage apprenticeships in areas that were underrepresented, and then worked to not target, but kind of focus our resources on recruitment in underprivileged areas of London, and also at school leaver level as well, which was quite interesting. And it was the thing that really surprised me was, and we were recruiting for apprenticeships, both for a digital role and a policy role, was the level of ability that sat there, that the individuals, and the hunger and the desire was unbelievable. Like and we got some absolutely fantastic candidates, and 2 or 3 years on, they're absolutely flourishing in the role, and some of them are actually using some of their salary to put themselves through higher education whilst they're on the job. And I think that's something in conservation that we just don't do at all, is the idea of kind of taking somebody and saying, hey, okay, like, how do we give you the ability to gain those higher education qualifications? A bit like Svetlana mentioned, I've seen a lot of entry points for individual that I know very well, is a good friend of mine now, who's an expert in wildlife crime, who had to start in the conservation space as the receptionist at an organisation. And it took like 10 years for her to get a position in a programs team to be able to do that. I do think there's a particular issue there, which is that because conservation has some fantastic jobs, the churn or turnover of staff is quite low. And so that makes it very difficult to adapt teams as a senior manager to be more diverse, because the process is very, very slow. I've had more success in building more diverse teams, but ironically, where the turnover has been very, very high, because you can kind of shape those outcomes a bit quicker and a bit easier.
Thank you so much, James, for sharing that. I think it's really interesting that you highlighted the experiences that you have had when you try to set up programs to widen participation, and from the school leaver level, it's always, you know, it's right, it's a right pool to target. But I think what you just spoke about that person who it took her however many years to get into a role, I don't know, and like what Anand said about talent management and what I call workforce planning, is that very good use of your resource, which is the people, is that should it really take that long to utilize someone's skills? And I was in a panel, I think on Monday, and someone else spoke about they had very senior, very much like Svetlana, very good experience in the private sector, tried to kind of get into the environmental sector, and had to start from scratch, basically scrubbing out however many years of experience. But are we really kicking ourselves in the foot here by not acknowledging that, yes, they might not have exact experience, but they can actually run and manage a project, or they can run and manage budgets, and they can manage people, and then the sector knowledge that will just come? Or can we create a program where they gain that sector knowledge quickly, but they're still using their skills, so we're not like wasting talent? And I think there's something to be said about that.
There's definitely a kind of slightly weird sort of almost cultural sector thing, which is about almost having to earn your spurs, a rite of passage, which is kind of strange. But you sort of get it, where people will say, well, where have you worked, and what countries have you worked in, and for how long? And of course that's great if you can afford to do that, or you've had those opportunities. But even at the office level, head office level, whatever it may be, is this whole idea of, well, you've got to have done all of those kind of lower menial jobs for many years, and have all the badges sewn on your shirt before you can enter into a programs role or a campaigns role or something like that, which are the roles that are most coveted in an organization. And I'm not sure that's a healthy thing. In fact, it's not. I'm not sure. I know it's not a healthy thing to build those kind of cultures where people have to earn their spurs in that particular way. It seems strange to me.
I agree, and that attitude in and of itself is not inclusive, because it's kind of like punishing. Or because I had to go through a rough time, everybody has to. Really quickly, before I let Anand speak, I know I can see your hand. It reminds me of an example when I was working in an organisation in the for-purpose sector a few years ago, and I was running early careers programs, talking to a team, and I was asking them, like, look, we've got these apprenticeship programs, we've got these grad programs, we'd love to place a grad or an apprentice in your team. And another person kind of was a bit resistant and said, oh, when I was younger, the way I got into the sector is I just made the tea. I didn't do any work for years. And I'm like, yeah, I don't think that's not really going to cut it for this group of young people. I think we need to give them some actual work, and that would be nice. So yeah, then I think over time they have had people in the team that are grads, and they've loved it. And in fact, I think that grad's still in that team like 3 years later. So that shows that we need to kind of evolve the way people see early careers and entry level careers, and people who haven't necessarily been in the sector. I'm going to stop talking now and let poor Anand speak, because he's been waiting so patiently.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting conversation, because I think from what I hear from Svetlana and James about it, a couple of things come to it. It's a Gujarati saying, actually, that my mum used to say, "Banalo or ganalo" is what they say in Gujarati, and it's like banalo means you are kind of academically progressed, you kind of know your things, or ganalo, which is kind of more streetwise, street cred. And like, actually, in this sector, we place much more emphasis and, I don't know, kudos on the banalo, the academic qualifications, the topical knowledge and stuff like that, rather than what you bring from your life experience, the streetwise experience, if you like, your life skills, which have skills and competencies, and they seem to be undervalued in this sector. And I think that's at the detriment of the way that some of the organizations in this sector actually operate, because I think you can get really cool organizations that have all the kind of academia people there and kind of all the topical knowledge, but they're really poorly managed. And so, like, there's a lot of those people that come through that technical route, as I call it, they don't like the people management side of it. They don't like the budget management side of it. They don't like the project management side of it. They're just in it because they want to do something around birds or mammals or habitats or something like that, right? They're not, it's like, so you need to get that mixed together to make that operational, to give it operational success and to make it operationally effective. And I think this is something we're seeing in FSC, I would say, as well. And I think we are placing much more better emphasis on those functional stuff, especially as we're moving into this kind of digital world, right? So kind of GIS applications, kind of IT in particular, and digitization, kind of bringing those skills into those functional skills into this space. So looking outside the sector and bringing that in a little bit, I think that's happening. I can see that happening in FSC a little bit as we're looking at how we can show the world around what FSC is doing and some of the FSC certified forests and stuff like that around the world, and actually communicating that better. So I think that is starting to happen, but I think it's still a little bit later than I kind of expected. And still, I think that there is still this bias towards this. You have to have the topical knowledge and almost the stripes, as James called them, kind of like that before the functional. So there's kind of still, I think there's needs to be a bit more balance there overall. And that leads me to that kind of, again, that pool of talent and how you manage that as well. And what you see is you need, as people progress, do you need actually people that are good people managers to progress the organization, or do you need those topical ones? And most organizations have just kind of one pathway or one kind of set of hierarchy, and looking at whether you can do two-tier hierarchies and stuff like that, one for kind of people management and one kind of like technical specialism. So you still kind of raising through the hierarchy, and you can still get your pay rises and your kudos of your titles and stuff like that, but sticking in terms of what you're good at. So little bit of specialization and I think, yeah, too many times we're asking our technical people to get into people management and it's just not working out. And I think that's not good for the younger generations coming through, because they have bad experiences in particular of how they're managed or how they're supervised and what it is to be a supervisor. And that creates a real kind of, I would say, almost a passive aggressive type of culture in many of these organizations, actually.
Thank you so much, Anand. I think your points are spot on. Like I think we're all in alignment with what you're saying. Before we move, so we do have a question from the audience, but before we move on to that question, because I'm kind of saving that bit for the end, the solutions. So Tivo, I will answer your question. But another question I have, similar to what Anand was talking about, in terms of like lived experience. So in terms of like how we, as practitioners in the field and working in the industry for so long, all the panelists, what weight and how do we place the importance of people who live specifically in those areas who are affected by the issues that we're trying to solve, number one, specifically in the global south, and how do we elevate those voices and work with those communities as well as externally, but also internally? How do we do that in a way that's equitable, fair, and sustainable? And what have you seen as an example or examples of good and bad ways of doing this? Svetlana, did you want to talk?
Yes, Fauna and Flora's kind of ethos and raison d'etre is to work with communities on the ground, both from, again, grassroots organizations, to civil society, to government partners, because we as an international Western organization need the legitimacy of the local voices. That is absolutely clear, and the local knowledge. And it's only people who are local, whether it's our own employees or partners or government partners, community groups. It can only, conservation can only be achieved sustainably through empowering, enabling local voices. So that's sort of, I feel conservation actually understands that now as a sector. About how do we kind of, again, meaningfully make sure people have the skills? I suppose that's something we work with quite a lot on, developing not just, technical conservation skills, but as Anand was saying, leadership skills in the sector? How do we enable young conservationists, wherever they are, to gain the skills to actually manage the complexity involved in conservation delivery? I guess I'll mention that we run a amazing program. It's called Conservation Leadership Program with our partners BirdLife and WCS. And it is very much about enabling early stage conservation leaders from all over the world to access education, to be part of the program, training programs, to develop various skills, to get grants, to continue their work. It is very much enabling and very international, and delivering those needed sort of solutions, skills, trainings, grants to people on the ground. Of course, more would be better. So it's always a bit of funding, but making sure that the money flows to where people are, where nature is, and where communities live close to nature. That is absolutely imperative.
Thank you so much. Brilliant examples again, Svetlana. Has either James or Anand, have you got any ideas around this, like basically involving the people that we're serving in the work that we're doing?
I think it's a mixed bag, Grace, to be honest. In my experience, I've seen, there are organisations, Fauna Flora being one of them, that have put that at their core for a very long time. And that ethos is certainly one that I kind of came up with through my career. And I've seen some really great work in terms of transfer of skills and promotion of individuals. It's still quite difficult, I think, when you get to the senior level, because of where larger conservation NGOs are domiciled, right? If their HQ is in the UK or the US, there are practical issues with having leadership positions in different time zones, but also quite often organizations can sometimes put financial constraints around relocating staff to those geographies. And I think, there is a commitment that comes from not just having a strategy and an approach, but actually putting some money behind some of this stuff. I do continue to hear what I think is a pretty sloppy and lazy attitude in certain places. And I'm quite happy to kind of call it out around, in some of these places, there's just not the experience or the education or whatever it may be. And that's not my experience. I think that there were elements of that were truthful 30 years ago, but we're not there now. And I've worked with some exceptional conservationists in the Africa and Southeast Asia space specifically, who have fantastic skills and ability to be in senior roles, but quite often don't quite get there for a range of different reasons. So I think it is a mixed bag. One of the sort of subsectors that I think really, or there's two areas I think that need some addressing, one which is about resourcing and one which is about kind of culture and attitude. Firstly, the academic space in conservation is still extremely white, extremely Western. And there are challenges with the way academic institutions are treated in places such as, the African continent, as an example, is seeing lower tier, less quality research. They're always secondary in terms of names on papers, all of that kind of thing. And I think there's a transition that needs to be made there, definitely. At the other end of the pipe, I think there's a resourcing issue when we talk about the sharp end. It's all very well us saying, okay, well, let's make sure that we've got Africans working in Africa, but in some cases they're terribly resourced. And one area that I think is worth raising is, when we think about game rangers as an example, game ranger welfare, like, we're asking these people to put their lives on the line, and quite often their living conditions, the resources that they have are appalling. And I think, again, there needs to be further commitment towards, if we really want to drive the sharp end out to the field, out to where it needs to be, then we also need to have a commitment to making sure that's resourced properly, so that people can put their kids through school. It is a viable job for them in that location as well. And I think to some extent there's a little bit of a secondary thing here around, we can pay people less. I think there needs to be a more consistent move towards actually benchmarking decent wages for that particular level in that country, as opposed to kind of going, oh, we'll just give them half of what we're paid in the UK. I've seen a lot of that where it's not really taken seriously. It doesn't feel like a proper commitment to me.
Thank you, James. I think you've raised some excellent points there, especially around that kind of colonial view of, first world, second world, all of this third world nonsense. Pardon my French there, but I personally think it's nonsense, because what it does is show the division and also shows the level of elitism, which we can see in our report in the sector around whose voices are heard, whose voices matter, what is seen as cutting edge, who is taken seriously and who isn't. And I think if we continue to do that, not just in this sector, but in various sectors, then it doesn't work for anybody, because the people that live in the environments that are directly affected by the things that we're trying to solve are the ones that can come up with ideas to solve them, because they deal with it on a day-to-day basis, right? So if we're not hearing those voices and taking them seriously, then we're not really committed to solving the problem. Then it ends up just being, I don't know, like an exercise in just something to do for some people, I suppose, to make it look like they're doing something when they're not. So thank you for sharing that. Anand, again,
Yeah,
sorry.
I'm really interested in this space, and actually, it's from, I think, Svetlana maybe, but as you as a kind of COO in that sense. So we've had a new COO just during this week, actually, earlier this week. So that's going to be really interesting. Kind of, I think, a British Kenyan lady who's just joined this week. So I'm looking forward to meet her to look at how. And for me, this is really important, because operationally, it's about how do your operations fit, and how do your people fit into your operations, and where is that balance line? Do you have to expect everyone to fit into a kind of operational model, or can you build flexibility and agility in your operational model to allow people to fit into people's lives and ways of working? And a very good example for me is like where FSE is based in Bonn in Germany, so actually quite an international city. So in terms of recruitment and in terms of diversity metrics and stuff like that, we do very well from a diversity metrics and stuff like that. Operationally, though, it's really tough to see. I'm lucky enough that I'm in Europe, so I used to run the region in Europe. But my colleagues in APAC in Africa, for instance, just the expense, the way that we do expenses for them, the way that makes it so tough, and it takes them people away from what they love doing, what their real jobs is, and makes them kind of less productive, if you like, in that sense, right? Because you're kind of asking them to fit into, and just a simple example is just expenses. I was in Africa last year, and like couldn't get something working, and it's like, right, why can't we just find out a way to do kind of M-Pesa as the kind of mobile payments in Africa, which just work. It just make life is how can I convince our central team, our accounting team, to just let go of or to build some agility to say, just let the African team do mobile payments, can they? And that's the conversation that we're now still having. I would hope they're quicker, but at least they're open to it. And it's like, where does that exist? And I know that from our finance people, they've got rules, regulations, and German laws and audit and all this kind of stuff. And Germany is a very rules-based society in that sense. So you do have to stay in there. And so they've got their needs and wants, and to make them operationally efficient as well. And how do you bring those two realities together? And where's that balance line? That's a really fascinating part of international organizations in particular. And is it one model? Is it federated models? Is it and where do you get that? And then where do you get that balance between kind of alignment in terms of strategy, goals, vision, and kind of and agility for people to do to still achieve the overall vision and a mission, but in their own different ways of approaching it, and contribute in a different way, not just a kind of one way.
Absolutely. So like building into the system that flexibility and then adaptability, so it actually is relevant and easy for the people that you're trying to work with, rather it being a kind of a noose around people's necks. Sorry for that horrible analogy. It's the only one I could think of. But sometimes it can be so restrictive, then it kind of defeats the purpose in the first place. So where can we flex? Where is it not possible? Where is it possible?
But I'll say the expenses system in particular, because people just get fed up of just claiming, and then they lose out financially. I know people in our teams in Africa just can't be bothered to do it. Oh, it's $5 here or $10, and then but over time that adds up, and by the end of the year they're bloody couple of hundred, couple of thousand out, and that's taking a hit on that.
I think there's a really important part of understanding that local perspective that Anand's touching upon. There's a great story. I experienced it myself, but several years back, I was traveling to a corporate engagement workshop in Delhi, and I turned up late because I was doing some other work in another bit of the world. And all the participants for the workshop had been out on a field trip for the day. And it got to 10 o'clock and they all came back and they looked absolutely threadbare, like absolutely threaded. And they all wandering in grumpy, kind of like, oh my God, I've spent 5 hours in traffic, all the rest of it. And the India country director, the wonderful guy called Gajendra, who I knew really well. And I kind of said, I looked at him and he looked at me with a cheeky look in his eye. And I said, you did plan this, didn't you? And he said, yeah. He said, because next time someone asks me to do more than one thing in a day, they'll understand why it's not possible in Delhi. And I love it as a story because it's kind of funny, but at the same time, it actually talks to the point that quite often I don't think we work hard enough to understand the difficulties at the delivery level and ensure that we can shape our operations in a way that sets those people up for success rather than us putting metrics and KPIs around them that are just impossible to achieve.
Fantastic. Svetlana, do you have anything to add?
I suppose I'll just add that I suppose organizationally, a lot of us grapple with the reality of actually donor requirements, and that's something again it's interesting mentioned in your report, the role of funders in kind of all of this, because internally we try to be very flexible and kind of have internal controls, and we have to do that of course because we want to make sure that we're a well-run organization, but equally some of our donor requirements that come in particular with statutory donors, and we're about 30% statutory donor funding, come in with requirements that are so disproportionate, but possibly to the risk that could happen with 100% evidencing on every receipt, which of course we know people traveling in the field are not able to get a receipt for a meal on the roadside, things like that, which are we need to somehow change that dynamic possibly with the donors. But of course, I understand their position because it's public money. They account to their taxpayers. So it is a difficult situation. So how can technology help us? How can there be more, hopeful there will be more processing systems that can make sort of expenses and things like that or mobile payments more easier. I hope that will enable us to be all more efficient and spend less time processing and have better accountability across the sector for the money and impact we achieve.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. So we've got about 10 minutes left, and what I'm going to do is now I'm going to showcase one of the questions that we got from the audience. Thank you for sharing this question. And the question is, how can boards or senior management or leadership teams who aren't as diverse help their organization change the perception of the sector? So if you can give like a couple of tips or bits of advice you would give somebody asking this question, that would be really great. Who would like to go first? James?
But let's let Anand go first because
oh yeah, true. Poor Anand hasn't spoken first.
Well, I have. I don't know about that, but yeah. How can boards? Yeah, our board is actually pretty diverse because of the way our FSC governance works. So we have a very particular governance model, which means there is some diversity. Could be better, but there is diversity on our board. I think, and our board meetings are done across the world. So we have 3 to 4 board meetings a year, and they're hosted in different locations. So I think this year we've been to China, and the secretariat team will be expected to travel there, for instance, and organise a meeting. And usually usually in those China's this year we've had, I think it was Argentina last year. So and it's kind of like some of our key markets or key forest areas or key topic areas or where there's tensions or around forest, how forests are managed, etc. as well. So that's where they go. And then we have one in Bonn every year as well. So usually it's 2 out of Bonn, one in Bonn, or something like that. So they and usually stakeholder days, so that they get to meet our stakeholders and the teams that are working for us, and they have a way of shaping those boards as well. And usually the after the kind of after kind of dinners and all that kind of stuff, the local teams play a big role in that, in terms of helping them to understand the local culture and their kind of working models perhaps as well. So that's the boards done pretty well. In terms of our leadership, I mean, our leadership go to the board meetings, of course. And so, could do more out. I mentioned championing earlier, mentoring. I think that's something that we could do a little bit more of. And so I think that's something I think that needs to happen a little bit more. And it's both formally and informally. I think both models can work. As well. So yeah, but need to be used and valued, I think, as well. And I think ultimately, leaders need to be given time to do this work as well, and to work to develop people and the organizational aspects of the model, as well as doing their kind of functional leadership work as well, if you like, as well.
Thank you, Anand. Svetlana?
Yeah, the question was about specifically about how to, I guess, improve the perception of the sector, and how can governance play a role in this? Because our governance board is, we're trying to diversify it. We have, again, exceptional skills and people who are willingly giving their time to be on our boards. But equally, they realize that there is very much value to diversity in our governance. But I guess in terms of how elevating the sector overall, we talked about this a little bit, about kind of the status and society of these issues that are pressing, that are sort of are going to affect all of our lives within our lifetime. How can that be brought up in competing problems that the world faces? And this is where we're changing our model. Previously we've had sort of a model of vice presidents, and we're so fortunate to have Sir David Attenborough, who is our vice president. But we're changing the narrative and not calling it kind of more kind of that vice president type of roles, because it's not necessarily a governance role. It is a champion. So we're calling these wonderful people nature's champions, and we're really kind of progressing how we engage leaders in society, influential people, politicians, business leaders, in caring about nature, and really engaging in this topic. And again, of course, the world has wonderful examples of people who are really moving into this space and starting to become strong champions and advocates for nature, because we don't have time. But we need everyone to be sending this message to decision makers across the world. So.
Fantastic. Thank you, Svetlana, for sharing that. It's really some really good practical examples there. James?
Yeah, I'll probably focus my answer on culture, but I think, there's definitely something that I'm particularly interested in at the moment around how, underrepresented groups in nature haven't had that connection with nature in their childhood, access to it, maybe because they lived in urban areas, and it becomes very difficult to catalyse a movement beyond the traditional groups. And I'm really pleased to see there's lots of stuff around well-being and nature now coming out. I'm a great believer in putting your money where your mouth is. I've been a leader in the organisation. I know how hard it is to get rid of unpaid internships. I think there are practical things that we just have to do to move on. More apprenticeships, defined career pathways, more role modelling, but even simple things like, understanding that some people might not even be able to afford to come to interviews. So, are we really offering to cover people's travel costs, even if it's just a travel card in London, making sure that our interviewing practices remove that kind of bias. But probably my main thought, it's something that really impacted on me. It's kind of lucky a few years back to work with Janet Darby, who's an MP, and also David Lammy around this topic. And it was so good to be challenged by them around certain things. And we were working with them to get their advice around how to structure apprenticeships in the wildlife conservation space. And one of the things that they said repeatedly was was about the kind of subtlety of the situation. So it's all very well putting these people in place, but what does it look like on day one when they turn up in the workplace and they see a sea of white middle class faces? And how threatening is that to them? And also how prepared are the staff for people from different backgrounds to come in? If you've got individuals from difficult backgrounds, maybe they're a carer at home, maybe you have to look at more flexible working hours for them, or maybe they're a single parent, and the impact that has on other staff who may not have access to the same level of flexibility. And there was a hell of a lot of prep work that we then put in with the existing staff to make sure that they were kind of ready for these apprenticeships, that they had allocated enough time to support and mentor those individuals, rather than that just being oh yeah, we'll do it. We actually had to bake it into people's schedules. And there's a lot in there, I think, like in terms of, we like to think that we're welcoming, like as a sector, but how can we be more welcoming? How can we ensure that, I can remember clear as day, like David Lammy saying to me, if you can't see it, you can't be it. And I thought such a good, simple phrase for EDI in terms of role modeling and mentoring. So I think there's lots that we can do, and it doesn't all have to be expensive.
Fantastic. Well, we're coming to the end of the session, but I wanted to say a big thank you. And what I'm going to do before we end is just do a little bit of a summary of what I've heard. I think we've had a really healthy discussion about the sector. Some really great case studies about what you've been doing, what you've seen that works. And I think some of the things that we can do as individuals are things like creating an intentionality into it. Things like this don't happen by accident. As James highlighted in the example he just gave, you have to be prepared as an organisation. And it's something at what we do at Oxford HR is when we are placing candidates, especially if there's a massive emphasis on diverse candidates, that the organisation has done enough work or done some work to prepare themselves for those diverse candidates. So is there fairness baked into the recruitment process, onboarding? What about performance management? What about career advancement, talent management, as well as workforce planning? Is that also, proportionate, and is it fair, and is it equitable? Because what we don't want to do is put people into positions just to tick a box. We don't want to create initiatives just to tick a box to make ourselves feel better. What we need to do is create an environment where we're actually making a difference, but also doing that in an inclusive way. So things like, development programs with sponsors, not necessarily just mentoring programs, but also coaching programs to develop the next generation, and also to develop people who haven't had those skills and that input into their career, and create an equitable kind of slightly more level playing field. So all of those things need to be married with top level support and top level buy-in, because if senior leaders and board members are not on board, then it's even harder to do the work. And then communicating that and sharing that information and insight, and creating environments where service users and people who are close to the cause are also inputted in. So anyway, that's enough from me. Thank you so much for your time. Everyone who was there, also thank you for attending, and this will be available on record as well. And you can also download our report, which you'll be able to get access to the link as soon as we have finished. Thank you everyone for your time.
Thank you very much. Enjoyed it.
Bye.